Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you will find a much more positive narrative when it comes to tech transformation, especially compared to what you typically find in mainstream media, certainly at the moment. So I'm looking to talk with people that see solutions rather than problems in these uncertain times, and today's guest ticks every box. Because he's a self-confessed geek with an insurgent mindset, a disruptive tech evangelist, digital transformation pioneer, customer-focused business leader, and hands-on team player, not to mention seasoned C executive in the tech sector. But as CEO of Mphasis, Nitin Rakesh takes pride in leading an applied tech company where it's actually cool to be a geek, where they are driven every day to empower enterprises, embrace digital transformation journeys by optimizing assets, inculcating a learning culture, and pivoting approaches in preparation for an exciting digital future rather than daunting. He also enjoys enabling his team of driven technologists, customers, and their end users to try and stay ahead of the curve by leveraging next generation technology to creatively solve those big and small enterprise IT challenges. So, striving to find disruptive solutions to help clients stay ahead of the pack, all that enables him to lead Mphasis with the rigor and tenacity that has helped it become one of the fastest growing digital companies. And he believes that change is the only constant in these uncertain times, and who's going to argue with him there? But it's also inspired him every day to steer his team towards enabling their clients to be more agile, iterative, and future-ready in this digital era. So an enterprising dreamer that challenges the status quo sounds like the perfect guest for the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. So enough of me. Let's get Nitin onto the podcast right now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Thank you, Neil, for having me on the show. Really excited to be here. So my name's Nitin Rakesh. At heart, I am a technology evangelist, really passionate about application of technology in not just everyday life, but how businesses and enterprises can actually really transform the way they engage with clients and provide value and showcase the power of technology as it comes to delivering those products and services. So in my day job, I run a technology services company called Mphasis. That is essentially a global business, headquartered out of US and India, and focuses on the Fortune 2000 companies in helping them apply the technology.
And it's your passion for technology, which is one of the reasons I'm excited to get you on the podcast today, because I think we've all seen the headlines around these uncertain times that we find ourselves in. But on this podcast, I always try and create a more positive narrative that focuses on solutions rather than problems. So do you think we should be creating more opportunities in this time of crisis rather than focusing on the negative constantly? Because that's what we seem to be doing at the moment.
Absolutely, Neil, you said it. I think, again, I'm a big believer in this often used term called never waste a good crisis. If you really look at what's going on in the last few months, especially starting March when this became a global pandemic, I think a lot has changed in the way we lived our daily lives. And the only reason we've had some semblance of continuity in our lives is because of technology. So I think this crisis really put a spotlight on a number of trends that were already underway, whether it was the whole move towards digital interactions, the ability to drive some personalization, e-commerce through online shopping. I think there's been a significant acceleration of a number of these trends over the last few months, and the biggest positive takeaway that I have advised clients on is to use this crisis to really create opportunities and value as we kind of come out on the other side of this crisis.
And of course, your new book is called Transformation in Times of Crisis. So I've got to ask, what inspired you to write this book? And did you write it before the pandemic, or did you make the most of your lockdown time by writing it then?
And I think it's a bit of both, Neil. I think firstly, I'm a big believer that, as I mentioned early on, that the rapid emergence of multiple forms of technologies and the fact that they're actually coming together in their tipping points almost at the same time. Whether it's things like just plain simple compute power, robotics, sensors, artificial intelligence. I mean, there's just a whole slew of technologies that has been in the works for the last 15 to 20 years, and they're all kind of hitting their tipping points now. And that creates a very powerful opportunity for our lives to be changed dramatically. I mean, if you just take a simple step back and see how our lives have changed in the last 10, 15 years already with emergence of technology, I think the next 10, 15 are going to be really more, even more spectacular and breathtaking. So we were already, researching a lot about the topic of disruptive innovation and how enterprises can actually use this emergence of tech as a great, accelerant to transforming their businesses. Along comes the crisis, and every trend that we had seen effectively gets accelerated and fast forwarded by many years. And just to give you a perspective, online e-commerce in the US has seen the growth in 3 months equivalent to the growth it saw in the last 15 years. That's the level of acceleration we're talking about. So effectively, we took those two, disruptive innovation combined with acceleration due to the crisis, and I think that creates a very powerful, lethal combination of how enterprises need to now transform just from a survival standpoint. Just to give you an example, every bank in the world, effectively on 15th of March, around about that time, was told that the only way they can do business now is through faceless, contactless digital interaction with customers. So it isn't just a good to have, to have a digital presence. It's actually a must have for survival. And that's what really inspired us to fast forward and track, and really track a lot of these initiatives and trends through this book.
Absolutely. And over here in the UK, there's a store called Primark, which is hugely successful, but doesn't have any online presence at all, or they don't sell online. And during the pandemic, they went from 650 million revenue every single day to zero because they had nothing online, which is a big wake-up call for them, I'm sure. But in your new book, you do explore some of the main principles to create opportunities in a crisis. So can you expand on some of those principles and how companies listening can defend against disruptors or even become one themselves?
Absolutely, Neil. I mean, think about it, right? Where is this disruption coming from? I mean, even before the crisis, we've seen what has happened in the retail industry over the last 20 years with the emergence of players like Amazon. Same thing applied to media with the players like Netflix. And you start seeing that this is a pattern that actually cuts across multiple industries. And if anything, the pace of change is only getting accelerated. Just to give you one data point, since you talked about businesses and companies listening to the podcast, more than 50% of the companies that were in the Fortune 500 list at the beginning of the century in 2000 are actually no longer in the list today. Right, so it's just taken us 20 years for more than half of those companies to disappear from the Fortune 500 list. Never before have we seen this kind of pace of disruption. So I think you're absolutely right. A lot of these principles have been coming together for a number of years, and the biggest reason why we are seeing this disruption is because the consumer has shifted in their expectations from traditional enterprises and what they expect them to be in terms of delivering value. So the very first principle we start with is to reimagine and reinvent approach to customers. And then we talk about how you can use technology and things like data and digital and to drive things like personalization, because the customer is no longer expected to follow your pattern if you're a business. The customer expects the business to service them anytime, anywhere, and effectively on their terms, including giving them the ability to effectively be served in a highly personalized manner. So they don't want to be treated like one to many. They want to be treated one to one. So I think those are the 3 or 4 main principles. And then of course, what you need to do to design for speed and agility. How do you create innovation within the enterprise? And how do you really create a mindset where you stay agile and nimble, because these changes in customer need and behavior and expectations will actually keep shifting fairly rapidly as well.
And of course, another subject that I know is very close to your heart is the ability to build a framework that will enable businesses to develop an implementation strategy. But can you tell me a little bit more about how to do that, again, for any of those leaders or decision makers listening?
Absolutely. So, we've talked about a framework. We've actually given out 8 distinct principles that talk about this particular framework. It starts with challenging your mental model, because very first thing, as you always know, is you have to be able to realize that you're going to drive a certain amount of change, and then we go from there to reinvention of customer approaches, speed and personalization, reinventing the talent strategy, because you need a whole different approach to talent, and in many cases you need to bring in an open innovation and open talent mindset. Then we talk about agility that comes from speed, design, and adaptability. Experimentation is an important element of that as well. And effectively, finally, I think it's all about execution. So how do you really execute to this to this changed environment? So I think none of this has to be a big bang. Almost all of this is an iterative process of continuing to shift a number of these priorities. And that's really what the book talks about, is how do you use these 8 principles in creating a framework and a set of tools that we've given as recommendations effectively to measure and baseline your current position and effectively continue to move the needle towards where you need to get to.
And you also talk about an app that provides you with a strategy worksheet that can help you reflect on those 8 principles as they can be applied to your strategy. But I'm curious, is that app meant for individuals, or is it with your team, or use it as a collaborative platform?
I think it's really all about creating this ecosystem of participants that can learn from each other. So the app's really all about creating an ecosystem of like-minded users who are all on a similar journey, and how they can actually learn from each other. They may be from different industries, they may be from the same industry in different markets, and so on. So I think it's really about creating a community ecosystem in a way, kind of to help each other along the journey and learn from each other's experiences.
I completely agree. So assuming you've got that community and that ecosystem, what are the kind of tools that are then needed to help you improve on that implementation process?
I think the biggest, as I mentioned, the biggest, topic of conversation really starts with, what are you really trying to design for? I think in some industries it's a lot less clearer than it is in many others. I think you mentioned an example in the retail business. I think that pretty much applies to almost every industry if you think about it. Anything that had, even within a business, there are divisions that are probably a little bit more tech advanced or digital advanced. Those have tended to perform a lot better during the crisis than the ones that haven't been. So how do you really create that vision? And I think that's the very first step, which is the baselining of where you stand today, as an overall business, and then kind of breaking that down into actionable, executable set of initiatives that cut across multiple time horizons, and not just what you need to do today and here and now. So I think the most important aspect of this really is that you have to build a portfolio of initiatives across all innovation horizons, and really keep the customer in the middle of all of that transformation. So in a number of ways, I think putting the customer in the middle of your transformation, reimagining multiple initiatives that start with the here and now. Some of them just might be catching up. For example, e-commerce and retail is a catch-up play. It's not really a differentiation. And then the others will really be all about what do you need to do to make that leapfrog from making sure that you stay relevant to your clients. And give you another example, you should be able to predict the future needs of each and every one of your consumer to a level more like an individual level. And the only way you can do that is if you actually really get to know your customer well in any industry. Right. So if you're doing digital marketing, for example, it shouldn't really be a mass mailer sent digitally. It should really be a very targeted set of offerings that you're able to personalize for each consumer, because you should be able to create a digital avatar or an understanding of each consumer's behavior and pattern, and do some predictive modeling to identify what that behavior should look like in terms of their needs. So I think that's what I meant by multiple horizons of innovation. That's what I meant by having a set of initiatives that run you through those horizons. But what you have to keep in mind at all points in time is the focus has to start and stay with the customer and the stakeholder.
And one other thing I'd like to highlight, because it does seem that almost everywhere we look now, whether it be mainstream media or our news feeds online or timelines on LinkedIn, is that a lot of people are focusing heavily on the negative aspects and the problems that we've got right now. So on a more positive note, which is something I try and do on here, what makes you hopeful and possibly even excited about the future and the power of the opportunities ahead that businesses can unlock?
And I think, Neil, firstly, I'm an eternal optimist. I think the world is a much better place today than it was even just 100 years ago. And I think if you compare a number of different years that went through multiple crises, firstly, what comes to mind is, I think the way the world has come together in dealing with this crisis, from healthcare to prevention to just, the intervention we've seen from multiple governments across the world in supporting businesses and individuals. I think it's just been a very, very positive, way of dealing with the crisis. We haven't really seen any breakdown in law and order or anything that gives you, reason to not believe that we are doing everything we humanly possibly can. Secondly, I'm also a big believer in the power of modern medicine. I think the way that the trajectory of a number of initiatives around finding a vaccine. And of course, we've got multiple, therapeutic cures now already in place. Has also kept a lid on the number of people that have actually been fatally lost to the disease. Now, unfortunately, there's even a small number is too many. But I think keeping that perspective that in a similar crisis, in the past centuries, we've actually seen the fatality rate to be much, much higher. So I think I'm a big believer that as the businesses, governments, and people have come together, and the scientific community has come together, I think there's a lot of optimism that we will actually conquer this crisis, and the world will be a better place again, because we would have conquered another big issue, learned from it, and potentially prepared the world if something like this ever was to happen again. And most importantly, and as I mentioned earlier on, a number of these trends that we are seeing, at least on the business side, aren't really new. And I think all this has done is put a spotlight. And if anything, I think this has also created a sense of urgency amongst many businesses that were either successful but not paranoid about change, have now seen that how a small change can actually create such a big damage. And I think they're much more focused on future-proofing their own businesses. So I think all in all, yes, this is a crisis and there's a lot of tragic news around us, but more importantly, this has created a major sense of urgency, brought the world together. And if anything, I think we'll come out on the other side with a better world in every front.
Absolutely. And it's so refreshing to hear that take on it. And especially your book, Transformation in Times of Crisis, feels incredibly timely at the moment and possibly the best antidote for a lot of people listening. So can you just tell me a little bit about who the book is aimed at, where they can get hold of it, and when it's available? It's out now, isn't it?
The book's in publishing now. We're targeting a launch over the fall. So in a couple of months, it should be available quite broadly. In terms of, your question about who the book is aimed at, the book is really aimed at anybody and everybody, who's thinking about the current crisis and what they can do to make the most of this. It is aimed at the C-suite in every company and enterprise, every employee of that company who has a role to play in the transformation, every stakeholder, including customers who want to be able to get a perspective of what their enterprises are doing in serving them better, and how they can actually expand on that feedback loop going back into those companies. So, we've kept the audience fairly wide. In a way, you can say it is a business book, but it's also a book that targets everyday common man that wants to be able to apply the same principles to their lives, because the way we consume services has changed dramatically as well. And I think the book hopefully will provide a perspective as to how that can actually improve lives and experiences for enterprises, for customers as well as enterprises.
It's certainly a book that I'm going to be pre-ordering. It ticks so many boxes for me. But of course, the book is just a small part of what you do. So for anyone listening that want to find out more information about the work that you do at Mphasis as well, or find you online, or even contact your team if they've got any questions, could I just ask that you point them in the direction of how to do that?
Absolutely. So I am on LinkedIn, Nitin Rakesh. I'm also on Twitter. Or, I'm also available on our website, mphasis.com, under the contact us section. And, anything we can do to help people learn from our experiences, help enterprises embrace the principles we've laid out, I'm more than happy to connect with them and guide them in the right direction.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for coming on today and not only sharing your story and the news about your book, but also providing a much needed, more positive narrative. And some of the things you were talking about there, about the importance of the community and building the ecosystem and providing those tools alongside those 8 principles, so much value in that. And that's one of the reasons I'll be checking out the book. But more than anything, just a big thank you for taking that time to come on here and share those insights and expertise with me today. So thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me, Neil. Really enjoy the conversation, and good luck, and look forward to making an impact.
So the book, Transformation in Our Times of Crisis, is certainly something that I'm going to be looking out for and learning more about, because the 8 principles to create opportunities in a crisis and to help defend against disruptors or even become one tick so many boxes for me, not to mention the framework to develop an implementation strategy, the building of the community and that ecosystem that, when given the correct tools, when put all that together, that's when the exciting stuff happens. But as always, I'll pass the virtual microphone over to you all. Please let me know your thoughts about today's interview, or if you've got any additional questions or insights you'd like to share, please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk, and you can get me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. Just look for @NeilC.Hughes. But we've reached the end of another episode. Doesn't time fly when you're having fun? But if you did enjoy yourself, why not join me again tomorrow? We'll do it all again with a different guest who hopefully will inspire you as much as Nitin did today. If so, I'll meet you here. But before I go, I just want to say a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.